This year is going to be in the merit of Moshe Gabriel ben Rachel Esther to have a complete refuah shalema. All right, so tonight we are delving into Ruth, who really connects to the story of Shavuos. So I think it's kind of nice sometimes to take someone who's associated with a certain time of the year and be able to think of them outside of that time. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Last week, just to recap really quickly, we ended talking about Chana and how she embraced emotion and struggle and was really her authentic self, regardless of who was around. And that's something that we're trying to channel. So with Ruth, a lot of what we're going to see about her is tremendous selflessness and an ability to act for the sake of Hashem, and her love for Torah and for serving Hashem really came before anything else, which was incredible. And I want to perhaps give you another perspective on it that can help us, again, look into ourselves within our Bein Adam La'atzmo and figure out how to feel better, be better, so we can do all the things that we want to focus on. So just to give you a heads up with Ruth, there's a lot of background information here. So it's going to take a little bit longer to introduce because it's all important to be able to set up the scene for what we're going to discuss. So hopefully you'll learn some new things. If not, it will be a review of the story for you. So I guess a question that I want to pose is in relation to Ruth and the way that she loved Torah. What part of ourselves and what part of Torah do we really love? Do we really enjoy thinking about, exploring? And how can we use that to empower ourselves to become better and accomplish our goals in our life? So to start, I actually have a Mishnah from Pirkei Avos. It's from Perek Aleph, Mishnah Gimel. And it says an interesting idea that Ruth was really all about. It says, Antigonus ish socho kibel mishimon atzadik. Antigonus was someone who received our tradition from Shimon. Hu haya omer, he would say, Al tihiyu ka'avadim hamishamshin es harav al menas lekabel pras. He used to say, don't be like servants who serve their master with the expectation of always receiving a reward. Ella, rather, Hevu ka'avadim hamishamshin es harav shelo al menas lekabel pras. You should be servants who serve their master without an expectation to get something at the end. Vehi mor shamayim aleichem, and the fear of heaven should be upon you. So what that's really referring to is serving Hashem without sort of, in a way, an ulterior motive and expecting that something good happens in the end. And that's something we're going to see from Ruth. So to set up the story takes place in the time period of the judges, the Shoftim. The Torah, we know, was passed down from Moshe to the Zekanim, the elders, and then down to the judges, the Shoftim. And this time period lasted about 300 years. The judges during this time were really responsible to make sure that the Torah law was being executed, but they didn't have any executive power. So it was a hard thing for them to do. As far as society, there was no king, somebody in charge, and everybody did as they saw fit. There was a complete lack of government, and every person was expected to go to the judges whenever they had some kind of a question or a dispute. And what that brings us to see is that there was a lot of turbulence, a lot of chaos during this time. There were good times when people dedicated themselves and they learned Torah and they did the right thing, but often they would get into the idolatry and the immoral behavior that was around them, and they didn't have a central guidance to really show them the right direction. And our story with Ruth really starts in one of the very low spiritual points of the nation. Again, society was completely corrupt, including the judges themselves. A lot of them who were supposed to be helping Klal Yisrael make decisions were corrupt. And a lot of Jews at the time who presented themselves to be faithful fell to the level of their pagan neighbors. And again, it's important to keep in mind, it's very hard to go against the stream when you're part of a society that's extremely corrupt. To stand up and do the right thing is a really difficult thing to do. Just to paint a little bit of a better picture too, There was no trust between people. Criminals ruled. Everyone took law into their own hands. The young people turned on the elders. People became judges just to make money. And that's sort of what things were like. There were a few righteous judges, though, that remained, and they tried to get people to remove themselves from the idolatry and do teshuvah. But it says that the people would laugh at them in response, and they would say, oh, you judges, you're trying to help us do the right thing. You're corrupt yourself. Why should I listen to you? That was like sort of the conflict that was going on. And in the cycle of the Jewish people, punishment was from Hashem was coming near, and people were really, they were scared of what was going to happen, but they also didn't speak up because it was just so difficult and just a struggle to live during this time. There's a pasuk that says also, woe to a generation that must judge its judges. So basically, even the people that rose up and were supposed to be these Torah leaders, they had to be judged themselves because of what they were doing. So Hashem decides to bring the plague of a famine in the land, a physical famine as well as a spiritual one, in order to make the people stop and reconsider the way that they were living. And at the time, we're introduced to Eli Melech, who lived in the city of Beis Lechem. He was a man of substance and means. He was a Talmud Chacham. He was a Torah scholar. He was also very wealthy, and he was a very important leader to the Jewish people. He married his niece Naomi, who also had an amazing reputation, and they had two sons who were the pride and joy of Beis Lechem. Eli Melech was really in a position where he had an opportunity to turn people away from corruption, but he was kind of absorbed in the things that he had and making sure that he had money and food, and he sort of didn't lean into that opportunity. Again, having wealth and having his lineage and really sort of rising to power, he struggled with dealing with all of it. And it says about him that he didn't take the responsibility that was his. And people could have really used the guidance to go back towards Hashem, but he was involved in his own thing, in his own life, and he wasn't able to fill their need. So Eli Melech actually decided to leave during the famine because he didn't want his food supply to run out. His wife, Naomi, tried to convince him to stay, but she was unsuccessful. So they decided to go to the city of Moab, where there was plenty of food. Moab was a city that was known for selfishness, and Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and the cities in it were places of Kedusha. So it was almost like opposite values going on. And Eli Melech did plan to return. So he settled a little bit outside of Moab, not to get too involved in the city. So eventually he would go back. But of course, he did get immersed in the pagan society. Again, it says about him that he should have stuck around. He should have provided people with guidance and even shared money, but he couldn't. It doesn't say why, but other than him struggling with, being focused on his wealth. And it says that he was held accountable for all the Jewish sins, all the people who sinned at the time, because again, Hashem placed him in this leadership position where he could have helped the people, and he chose not to. And so he was accountable for what they did. So Eli Melech's animals, they died from a plague. And instead of taking it as a sign that he needed to do teshuvah, he stayed in Moab, and he also got killed. He perished in a plague that struck only the land of Moab because of all the sinning and the idolatry that everybody was steeped in. After he died, his family remained with no guidance. They didn't have a head of the household. And because Naomi wasn't strong enough to be able to act against what her husband was saying to do, she received punishment as well. Naomi speaks to her sons, and she starts to tell them, you know what? Coming to Moab was a big mistake. And the will of Hashem is that we need to return to the Holy Land. They refused because they wanted to remain in what they thought was a land of opportunity. They thought that they would succeed there. They didn't want to leave. So they convinced their mother to stay with them. And they explain that the king Eglon, had interest, who was there at the time, had interest in marrying off his daughter Orpah to Kilion. And Kilion became the son-in-law of the king. And following this, he also married his younger daughter, Ruth, to Machlon, who accepted since she was a royal princess. So we have her sons, Machlon and Kilion, who married Orpah and Ruth. It says about Orpah that her name comes from the root of oref, like her neck, and that it was too stiff to be able to accept Judaism. And Ruth, we know about Ruth that her lineage was extraordinary in the sense that David HaMelech, King David, came from her. And it says that she was known for singing praises to Hashem. And she saw that Naomi was really righteous and she didn't want to sin. Some say that Ruth and Orpah underwent conversion before they got married, but either way, there was doubt about whether or not it was valid, which I'll go back to later. During this time, when Naomi's husband died, she was bereaved. She didn't know what to do. She was very upset, obviously, and she actually didn't necessarily have that much to do with her non-Jewish daughters-in-law. She sort of distanced herself from them. And Hashem sent a plague again over all the animals, and people just turned a deaf ear, and they continued to go down the wrong path. So the sons, Machlon and Kilion, died as well, and they were childless. So there was nobody left after them. Just to give you a picture of Machlon and Kilion a little bit, Machlon was also called Yoash, comes from the word Yeush, which means to despair, because he despaired of salvation. He didn't have any hope for a better future. Another name for him is Yimche, which means that his name would be erased from the Jewish people for who he was. Kilion is also called Saraf, which hints to the fact that he burned a law of the Torah. He did not want anything to do with that. Eli Melech, Machlon, and Kilion, it says about them that they were essentially good people who made the wrong choices and they got punished as a result, which is interesting to sort of think about in this whole picture. So now Naomi is by herself. She's completely heartbroken, full of sadness, and she went through Shiva, and then she sort of pulls herself together, and she knew in her heart that it was time to go back to Eretz Yisrael, since that's why her family died, because of the sin of leaving the land. She was afraid to go back and that people would laugh at her for the situation, because they would know that she was married to someone who was supposed to guide them, and they just up and left in the middle of the whole thing. And she was very nervous to go back. And one day she goes to the market and she hears some peddlers, and she finds out that the famine had ended and that she knew with clarity that it's really, really time to go back. But she was afraid to talk to Ruth and Orpah, her daughters-in-law, because they were princesses of Moab. So why would they want to go with her back to Eretz Yisrael? And that's sort of when we see that they were close. They definitely had a close relationship. But when Naomi experienced her husband dying, it was hard for her to connect with them. So then it says, hang in there, I'm almost done with the background information. On the first night of Pesach, after the Seder, Naomi leaves the house in secret. Ruth and Orpah wake up for whatever reason, and they see her walking outside their window, and they chase after her. And Naomi says to them, I'm going back to Eretz Yisrael. This is what I've wanted for many years. They try to convince her to stay, and they come to a crossroads. And they wonder who's going to go and who's going to stay. Naomi expresses her gratitude towards both of them. She gives them a bracha, and they tell her, we're going to stick with you. We're going to go where you go. Orpah originally said that she would do that because of the way she felt toward Naomi. She felt close with her. But Ruth really said that because she, right away, the Psukim say that she had a desire to keep the Torah, and she knew that that's the path that was going to lead her to it. And Naomi says back to them, if you come back with me, you're bound for a lonely, miserable life. Like, I'm going to feel guilty because I don't have anything. I don't have money. I don't have a husband, no children, no social status. I can't offer you any kind of decent life. So, and then she says to them, go home. Just go home. Go do your own thing, forge your own path. It's not a good idea. So Orpah decides that her home is in Moab and that she doesn't have to place her whole future in Naomi's hands, even though she loves her. But Naomi knew that she was a pagan at heart, and that Moab was a place that she would need to be. It actually says about Orpah that she was rewarded with 4 mighty sons for shedding 4 genuine tears when leaving Naomi. So even though she stayed, sort of seeped into Moab and its ways, she had these genuine tears because she was close with Naomi and she felt something when they parted ways. I thought that was beautiful. Then the psukim take us through and they tell us that they began crying very loudly. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell, but Ruth, it says, V'Rus davka ba, she clung to her. Naomi then told Ruth, look, your sister-in-law, she returned to her people and her gods. You go and follow her and do the same thing. And this is the famous pasuk that's said about Ruth, which is really, really telling of her character. And it's what we're going to see all throughout this year. And she replied, do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. Ki el asher telchi elech, for wherever you go, I will go. Uva asher talini alin, and wherever you sleep, I will sleep. Amech ami, your people are my people. Ve'elokaich elokai, and your God is my God. Really, really beautiful. So she also tells her, where you die, I will die, and there I'm going to be buried. Whatever happens to me, it doesn't matter. Only death is going to separate us. So Naomi saw that Ruth was insisting really, really strongly on going with her. So she stopped trying to convince her to turn away. So Ruth's determination in sticking with Naomi, as we see through the story, really was inspired by her loyalty to Naomi and their relationship, but also it was rooted in a deep commitment to Hashem and his Torah. Now, what I find interesting is that the psukim don't say a whole lot about exactly why or how that looked for her or how she served Hashem. I mean, we know a lot from the story, but there was a deep rooted commitment and she was so persistent because she knew that it was the right thing to do. She felt a connection and she understood that no matter what comes along with being a Torah Jew, whether it's suffering, whether it's hardship, because she faced adversity, which I'm going to point out, she knew that it was the right thing to do and she was willing to stick to the Torah no matter what. So what I want you to start thinking about is that ability to commit to something 100% is like to find a part of your observance and whether it's something about yourself or you want to look at it in the relationship with God, something that you might not be super committed to, and to learn from Ruth to take it all the way. And there's a lot of lessons throughout, and I'm gonna try to point them all out. So Ruth said to Naomi, I'm ready to embrace every hardship. I'm committed to staying at your side through thick and thin. Like we saw in the pasuk, where you sleep, I will sleep. Where you die, I will die. And I'm never gonna leave your side. The last part of the pasuk says, Hashem, your God is my God. And what Ruth was trying to say was, Hashem is mine just as he is yours, even though she was not fully practicing yet. Like she sensed that that's the place where she belonged. Your people are my people. And she told Naomi, we're going to travel to Eretz Yisrael together with one common goal. We're going to join the Jewish people. We're going to serve Hashem. We're going to live by his Torah. That's what we're meant to do. And I think that what we also start to see is that Ruth had a very defined goal of serving Hashem and being super dedicated to his Torah. And she was one track minded. It's incredible. It takes a lot to be persistent. And that's the quality I want us to try to channel. Like have a goal and go for it and make a plan and be one track minded about accomplishing that. So Naomi turns to her and she says, I don't understand. You were a princess. You were brought up in a life of privilege and security. Why would you want to join such a downtrodden nation as a Jewish people? That's what she wants to know. And Ruth's response is, I love Hashem and I love Torah. It's fascinating. Like, especially when you think about what the Jewish people went through. And she was so willing to not just jump in, but to stay committed. And she said, I want to share the destiny of this incredible people, no matter where that leads. Even if it leads into exile, even if it leads into suffering, I'm there. So Naomi says to her, there are 613 commandments that we must follow. Like, that's a big number. They require absolute obedience. There can't be debates or arguments. You can't change it. You can't pick and choose. So how are you going to deal with that? So Ruth says to her, with or without you, I'm going to live in Eretz Yisrael and I'm going to be a Jewish woman. That's my destiny and I'm not going to change my mind. That's literally her response. And it just, again, shows that persistence. And what's interesting is also the words that she uses as what were, I love Hashem and I love his Torah. And I also think it's an incredible lesson to think about what part of you, or you can think about it as what part of Torah do you really love? Do you enjoy observing, experiencing, and how can you use that to do it even better or to fuel yourself to accomplish other things? It's interesting to think about because, again, like we struggle all the time in life. And it's interesting to take a Rus perspective almost and think about the parts that are successful and the parts that you really love, because that's also like what fuels us forward. And it's true that the Torah, we can't change it and we can't necessarily pick and choose. And there are things about it that are hard. They are hard to observe and hard to keep, but there's also parts that we love, and it's important not to lose sight of that. So Naomi embraces Ruth and they go to the land of Hashem together. And Ruth was so eager to spend the rest of her life as a Jewish woman. So Ruth said that she's going to do everything in the Torah, regardless of what it takes. And this was really also a way of seeing that she was acting lishma, like I mentioned in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, not to serve Hashem out of expecting a reward or something good will happen in the end. Acting lishma means sort of going above that mindset and doing it because it's right. And that's really what Ruth's intention was, to act for the sake of Hashem. Kind of similar to the idea also of Naaseh v'nishma, right? That the Jewish people said when they accepted the Torah, that we're going to do it. We're going to do it no matter what. And that's what comes first. And so now in this part of the story, Boaz sort of comes into the picture, and I want to point a few things out. So Boaz, who was also a leader at the time in the land, who was in charge of the field, had a lot of people that were part of that system. And I'm not going to go into so much their interactions, but I want to point something out. So Boaz, he sees Ruth working in the field, and he recognizes that she is a righteous person. And he hears people start to talk in the town that there were some rumors going around about Ruth and who she was. And people said that she's not really Jewish. She didn't go through a proper halachic conversion in Moab. How do we know that? Because the only people that were around at the time in Moab were Eli Melech, Machlon, and Kilion, and they were all related to her in some way. And family can't rule on a Beis Din in Jewish court. So there was nobody around that could have possibly helped her convert properly. And really, she's a Moabite. She has the Moab ways. She's steeped in it. She's never going to change. That's who she is. We should not accept her into our nation. And the way the text talks about it is really that this was a form of slander. And it's also a lesson of like making sure that whatever you're hearing, you understand where it's coming from in the source. And even if it's true, to make sure that you should be accepting it. But Boaz knew that Ruth had righteous intentions, and he knew that she would be destined to enter into the nation. So he explains to Ruth, I'm sort of jumping ahead. He talks to Ruth and he says, I don't believe any of those negative things about you. And he guides her. And he says, don't return to that world. Show that you trust in Hashem, and we're going to embrace you as a convert. You'll see. Follow the Sanhedrin, follow what I tell you, and it's going to work out. So Ruth is really grateful for his encouragement. And she says, like, I'm determined to stay here. I love Hashem and I love his Torah. And this is what I'm sticking to. But she worries that Boaz was just saying all of those things just to make her feel better. So she asks him, like, why do you believe in who I am so much? After everything you heard, like why do you see me as this righteous person? I don't deserve to have such a good reputation. And he responds to her and he says, from everything I've seen, you're kind, you're full of compassion. She shows her love for the people and for Hashem through her dedication. Her kindness to Naomi was incredible. This is something she excelled in as well. She took care of her mother-in-law in an incredible way. She was super dedicated to her. And it's definitely a hard thing to be able to do that. And he says, like, your spirit is deeply Jewish. You were a princess in Moab. You didn't have a care in the world, and you turned back on everything, your home, your city, your people, and you chose to join us and to serve Hashem. That shows that you're in the right place and that you have this Jewish soul. And we see that she made this decision, even though her life went from being pretty good to pretty bad, coming into a place where she wasn't accepted. She didn't know anybody. I mean, like, I think about it even in very different terms, but I've moved around a lot. And every time I've come to a new place, it's so overwhelming. Don't know a single person. You don't know where to buy the gefilte fish and the challah. And you're just like, what do I do? And you feel lost. And to think of Ruth, obviously different than this, on a much higher level, coming into a completely different place, coming from being a princess and having things that she wanted and needed, to coming to being part of an incredible nation, as we know, but she knew that it was the right place and she was willing to do whatever it took. And she also, what I love is that she understood that it comes with hardships, that it's not just like this big rosy picture where everything always works out and it's just great. No, good things come with struggle, with hardships of all kinds, whether it's with wealth or poverty or anything in people's lives. And she knew that was part of it. She said, even if the nation's in exile and suffers, I want to be part of that nation because I want to serve Hashem. And she recognized, that this was the right thing to do. So Boaz tells her, regardless of her acting for the sake of Hashem, she's still going to be rewarded for her kindness. And she asks Boaz, she says, why should Hashem reward me? I did what I did because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected something in return, which goes back to our Mishnah. But he says, you're going to get rewarded still for converting and for being so selfless. And he says to her also, like, you had nothing to gain by doing this, but you did it because you love Hashem. So Boaz tells her that kings, scholars, and prophets are going to descend from her. Her great-grandson and his son will sit on the throne of the Jewish nation, and she will sit beside him. And that we know is talking about King David, which is, again, incredible. So also to think about where David came from, is also an interesting point. So Ruth responds and she says that she's touched by everything that he said. And she's really trying to take the message of believing in herself, as an inspiration from what she sees from Boaz and how he looks at her. And she struggled with it at first and said, like, why do you see me as so great? And once he pointed out everything, she was able to see it a little bit. And I think I definitely speak to myself. It's another lesson of believing in who we are and what are the great parts of us, because it's easy to be able to depend on other people to tell us that we're great and that we have great qualities and we accomplish great things. But it's important to also try to look at yourself and look at the good parts and say, wow, like, I am great. It's definitely something to strive for and work towards, because it's hard, but it's definitely important. One more thing I want to point out before I start wrapping things up a little bit and explaining some more lessons. We know that David came from Ruth, and I just want to show you a real example of how selfless he was in relation to how selfless Ruth was. You can really see a common denominator between them. David at a certain point in time found out that he wouldn't be the one to build the Beis HaMikdash, even though he really wanted to and planned on it and thought that he was destined for it. And he really could have given up when he found that out, got that nevuah, that prophecy, and said, I want nothing to do with this. If I'm not going to be the one to do it, then I won't do it at all. But instead, he did everything in his power to help the process along. So he went on, and to help with the future construction, he hired Kohanim to create blueprints. He conquered the surrounding nations. He collected bronze and gold spoils, and he really viewed himself as, I'm a servant of Hashem. So whatever that calls for, that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. So a side lesson, I guess, also of like, sometimes we encounter situations where we have two options. Do I focus on myself, or do I try to think big picture? What does Hashem want for me in this situation? And let me help that and move forward. An example I thought of, a small one, is like, I think of a kid who is told to clean up their mess. And they look around, they're like, I picked up my banana peel, like it was right next to my seat. I picked it up, so I'm done. And then you point out to them, you're like, wait, but there's a piece of paper next to it. They're like, wait, but that's not mine. Like, why should I have to take care of it? And it's really like, from David, we see the message of step out of your little zone. Just because it doesn't technically belong to you doesn't mean that you don't have something to do with it. And really, no matter where we come from, we are part of something bigger. Klal Yisrael, we're all connected, and everything we do affects each other. So our job is to look outside of ourselves. And again, to bring it back to Ruth, she was completely selfless, and she also viewed herself as a servant of Hashem. And everything she did for Naomi, for Boaz, it was all because she loved Hashem. And she's really our role model for doing the right thing, regardless of the situation. And that's why, partially, we know that she had the merit of having someone like David to descend from her, to inherit kingship, and eventually to bring Mashiach. So some lessons to think about, and then I'll give you some questions to ask yourself. So we know about the other women that, Sarah was promised a child, and she showed her strength and compassion. Chana got her tefillos accepted and embraced who she was, and she got Shmuel as a result. Devorah led the people in a very clear and tangible way, but Ruth seems to be a little different. Her conversion took place during an interesting time, and there wasn't necessarily like a big problem or solution or promise given to her about what's going to happen. It was her deciding in the present moment that this is what she knew to be right. And again, we know that as a result, the Davidic dynasty came from her. But that's not why she acted. She didn't hear that nevuah and say, if that could happen, then I'm going to serve Hashem. She did it way before that. And she really saw herself as acting purely. And that's also a really beautiful thing. I think, again, a practical idea from Ruth might be to try to take an action that you perform regularly and try to transcend the mindset of either I'm doing this for some kind of benefit, or maybe I'm not bringing enough intention into it, and try to do the action purely for the sake of Hashem, for the sake, or just to act to show your love for Hashem and his mitzvos. And I think it's also like, everyone has mitzvos that they're stronger in. Some people love to do achnasas orchem and to host guests. Some people love to daven. Some people love to give tzedakah. They feel very passionately about giving to other people. So whatever that thing is, reflect on like why you enjoy that, what brings you joy in it, and how can you devote yourself even more to doing that thing. And again, like thinking about the parts of serving Hashem and the parts about us that we really love, and using that to accept ourselves better, to be able to have more, to lead more meaningful lives. So I guess I sort of look at it as two perspectives. You can look at it as finding what you love about yourself so that you can grow as a person, and then that will affect your service of Hashem and relationships. Or if it speaks to you more, you can look at it as looking at what you love about serving Hashem and trying to devote yourself further to him. And Ruth really shows us what it means to serve Hashem out of love. It means to do it no matter what. It means to be dedicated, and it means to embrace challenge that comes with it. And I think it's really empowering to try to take a little bit of that persistence and strength to be able to channel it in our lives for being who we are and becoming better, and also doing mitzvahs in a better way. A couple things that I want to point out to end. So one thing that I actually did today in the little bit of time off that I've had so far, trying to maximize every minute. I took it's called the 16 personalities test, or MBTI, Myers-Briggs. There's many out there. And I've taken this one before, and I found it to be really helpful in learning about myself. And it was kind of interesting to take the personality test now versus a few years ago and be reminded of all the things that make me tick and what are my areas of strength and how can I like utilize that. But before I even do something with it, it was such a good reminder of like, wow, that's so cool about me. Wow, I'm really passionate. Oh yeah, like it sort of brings back like really good feelings and reminds me of like what's also behind so many things that I'm able to accomplish. So if there's any way that you can take time to learn a little bit more about yourself and be reminded of the great parts, I think that's really powerful, really, really powerful. And it sounds cheesy, like learn to love yourself. You know, there's like all these quotes and it's like, yeah, it's cheesy, but it's true. If we learn to love ourselves, then we can channel that outwards. But it really starts again with ben adam la'atzmo. It starts with what is your relationship with yourself, all the way deep inside where people don't even necessarily get to see. So a couple of ask yourself questions, and one more thing I want to point out before I open up to some discussion, if there's anything people want to share. The questions are a little bit connected to each other, but these are the words that came out, so I'm going to share them with you. Ask yourself, number one, like we just talked about, how can you reflect on the great parts of you and use it to help you achieve some kind of goal? And I would even add to that, how can you reflect on the good parts of you just to be reminded of those good parts? It doesn't necessarily have to come to action yet. Number two, what is one mitzvah that you enjoy doing? And how can you utilize that joy to devote yourself to it even further, to take it to the next level? Number three, what is a goal that you may have neglected over the past while within your personal self that you can rededicate yourself to? And I would say, try to take that persistence from Ruth and apply it there. And, you know, for me, what comes up often is I've had this certain goal in mind, but I can't, it's too hard, I haven't had time. And sometimes it's labeled as like, stop making excuses. I don't agree with that. I think it's hard. Schedules are hard. Life is hard, you know, to fit things in. So it's not so much as like, what are all the excuses I've made not to achieve this goal, but rather, okay, how can I reapply myself to this goal if it's really something that's important to me? How can I be sort of like one track minded like Ruth was? I love Hashem. I love his Torah. I'm going to do it no matter what. I'm going to stick to it. So how can I sort of take that? And another point, I've thought about this for a while and I've heard it being thrown around, and it's something I'm still trying to figure out, but developing some kind of a passion project where there's something that you work on that is solely for you and it's meaningful and you believe in it and it's something that you really care about. And to find something that you want to develop, and it doesn't have to do with other people, and it doesn't have to do with giving, and it doesn't have to do with parenting or anything like that. It's find something that you can put some energy into that will fill you up in a really meaningful way, and be one track minded about it, in the sense that maybe you devote a certain amount of time each week to working on it, to show yourself that you have all these great parts and you're doing something that's for you, so you can then go and apply your energy to then achieve other goals in life. And again, all of these things are hard and they take time, sometimes a lifetime. But I truly believe that everybody has incredible strengths. And I think Ruth can remind us to remember what those are and to apply them to achieving goals, because we can get there. And maybe the goal has to be broken into parts and you need to do really small steps at a time. Or maybe you're halfway there and you just need to like push a little bit further. So take that back out, whether it's a spiritual goal, a physical goal, something within yourself that you can try to develop a little bit more. And to really take that persistent quality is like to be determined and just stick to it. And it comes naturally to some, not so much to others. So let's try to channel Ruth in that persistent quality. I will send out those questions in an email afterwards as well. So don't worry about it if you didn't get it down. And with that, I am done with that. Thank you so much. And I'll open it up now. If anyone wants to share a question, you want to comment on something I said or share an experience, we would love to hear you.